What's up, friends? We made it once again. It's the end of the year. It's the end of 2024. And this year was full of a lot of travel and adventures for me. And I never know what each year is going to look like, but 2024 was definitely one for the record books. And I hope you guys had an amazing year as well. Now, every year I try and do a recap of my favorite year that came out over the year. But since there was way too many things that came out this year, I can't fit it all in this video. So I'm just going to go over the things that I liked most that came out in 2024. Also, stick around to the end. I'm going to give you some of my predictions for what I think is going to be coming out in 2025. I think it's going to be a busy year for camera releases, especially for Sony. So with all that said, let's get into it. So the first big camera release of 2024 was the Fujifilm X100VI. Now, this camera is the follow-up to the massively overhyped X100V, X100V. And it's crazy how a couple of TikTok videos made that camera so desirable. And if you owned one, and you wanted to sell that thing, the resale value on it was insane. You could literally sell it used for more than it cost new. For whatever reason, you just don't see that with modern cameras anymore. Now, Fuji actually flew me out to Tokyo, Japan for the release of the X100VI, and that's something I still can't believe. I don't know how I was chosen to do that, but I got to be a part of the press covering that launch event, which was really cool. Anyway, they basically took everything that everyone loves about the X100V and turned it up to 11. And it's now got the 40 megapixel X-Trans5 HR sensor in it, and that's the same one that's in the X-T50, and that's paired with the X Processor 5, so the camera is really snappy, especially when it comes to autofocus, because it now has all the new algorithms and AI focus modes. But I think the biggest change outside of the resolution and autofocus is definitely the fact that they were able to fit IBIS in this camera. And that's something I didn't think they could actually do, because if you've ever looked at how the X100 cameras are made, they're so compact, and the lens is actually mostly inside the camera body. So somehow they're able to fit it in there and only make it 2 millimeters thicker. And speaking of Japan, while I was there, I actually bought the DJI Pocket 3. And this thing was released last year, but it didn't really take off till this year. So it kind of feels like it came out this year. It was really hard to get. It was always sold out all the time. But yeah, it's been such a useful tool. It's good for behind the scenes. It's good for vlogging. It's super easy to use. It obviously has the little gimbal on it here. And I feel like they really stepped this thing up a notch over the old Pocket 2. Of course, it still has, the same type of form factor, but it has a 1-inch sensor. It's a 4K sensor, can record D-Log 10-bit video up to 120 frames per second. And I love that you can easily switch between horizontal and vertical shooting just like that. You just flip the screen down. I find myself mostly using this as like a top-down camera for filming unboxings because it's so long, it arches out over the table nicely. And this also works with a DJI Mic 2 without needing a receiver. And the DJI Mic 2 also came out this year, which is a really awesome mic. Anyway, I never made a review on this thing. I just feel like there's so many reviews out there already, but I just thought I'd fit it in this video because I really like this thing, and I'm pretty sure you guys would like it too. Now, the first phone I covered in 2024 was the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, and instead of doing a typical review, I just compared it to the A7 IV in portrait mode in the studio, because that's where we can really see how close things are getting in terms of processing and how good these cameras are getting. This is the best flagship phone that I think came out this year, in my opinion, but it still wasn't a massive leap over the S23 Ultra. The main camera is 200 megapixels still, which is insane for a phone. But in terms of processing, I'd say it's maybe only marginally better over the S23 Ultra, which also has a 200 megapixel main camera. But more than that, I don't know, they didn't really change the phone that much in terms of design. It kind of looks pretty similar. It's a little bit flatter now. But if you want to check out the video, I'll have it linked somewhere up here, somewhere if you want to check that out. Then shortly after that, Sony released a couple of compact zooms. So they came out with the 24-50 f2.8 and the 16-25 f2.8. And Sony took a pretty chill year this year. They didn't really come out with a ton of stuff. They came out with the ZV-E10, the A1 Mark II, which I'll talk about a bit later. But these compact zooms were designed to go with their small compact full frame camera. So the A7C II and the A7CR. They're roughly around the same size and weight. And if you would prefer a smaller, lighter zoom lens at the cost of range, then these lenses are really nice because they're around 400 to 440 grams. They balance really nicely on these cameras. I didn't make a review on the 24-50 because I feel like it really wasn't something I was interested in, but I did make a review on the 16-25, and in my opinion, I feel like that lens makes the most sense to be compact like that. So if you haven't watched that video, because it has very little views, make sure to check it out. I'll have a link up here somewhere or down in the description, so make sure to watch that. Now, next camera I got a chance to cover was another Fuji release, and that was the GFX100S Mark II. Now, typically these 100 megapixel GFX cameras have been really expensive, but Fuji decided to basically give you most of what's in the GFX100 II, which is their flagship camera, but do it for a much more affordable price. And this camera comes in at around 5,000 USD, which is actually cheap for a medium format camera. Now it has a newer processor in it, and with that has the updated autofocus system. And I really love shooting with this camera in the studio, and I found that the eye autofocus detection was so much better than the previous version. And I was told that it is using a new sensor, but it's not the same sensor that's in the GFX100 II. With that said, it's just a little bit slower, but it does have a really nice, beautiful sensor in it. Those 16-bit, 100 megapixel RAW files makes your jaw drop when you pull them up on the computer, and you like the first time you see them, the depth, the richness of the files. It's just something you kind of have to experience. Me talking about it isn't really gonna do it justice, but yeah. The design didn't change too much other than it's got this new Bishamon text texture on the grip. Outside of that, it's just a really nice refinement, a really nice update over the original GFX100S. Okay, so let's talk about Nikon. Because at the start of this year, Nikon actually acquired Red, and that's Red Digital Cinema Camera. So we haven't really seen what this is gonna do for Nikon or what it's gonna do for Red. I'm kind of curious what's gonna happen in 2025. And I think that this is kind of their way of shaking the potato camera meme. Anyway, they came out with the Z6 III midway through the year, and this camera has a unique sensor in it. It's kind of the first of its kind that I know of. They're using a full frame 24 megapixel partially stacked sensor, and that's going to give it a really fast readout as well as fast burst shooting and lower rolling shutter. Now the camera is actually really impressive, and I think it got a lot of stupid negativity just because when the test came out, the dynamic range charts, it showed that it was slightly worse than the Z6 II because of this new sensor and all the capabilities it has. Now, I actually shot a full review on the camera. I haven't had time to finish it, so you guys keep me accountable, and I will finish that video. But I did do my first impressions on it, and if you haven't watched that video, make sure to check that out. Now, in terms of dynamic range and real-world use, I didn't notice any difference. I didn't really notice any drawbacks at all. Maybe slightly less highlight recover when you compare it to something like a Sony A7 IV. And this camera's direct competition is the Sony A7 IV and the Canon R6 II, and it's way better than both of those cameras in terms of specs for the price, especially when it comes to video. So the Z6 III can shoot 4K 120 frames per second, no crops. It can even shoot 6K 60p at 12-bit internal RAW, which is crazy impressive for a camera of this price. It's around 2,200 USD. And I'd say it's probably the best hybrid camera you can get right now for the money in 2024. That may change in 2025 when I talk about some of my predictions, but yeah, that's the Z6 III. Now, Fuji had a couple more camera releases this year. They came out with the X-T50 and the XM5. Now, they never sent me the XM5 for review, but they did send over the X-T50, and with this camera, they completely skipped the X-T40. It doesn't exist. So they basically made a little mini X-T5, so it's rocking that new X-Trans 5 HR 40 megapixel sensor. It's got the X Processor 5 in it, updated autofocus system, and has all the new AI subject detection modes. And it basically feels like you have a little mini X-T5 right down to the non-rotatable tilt screen. Now, they were able to actually fit 7 stops of IBIS in this camera, and it can even shoot 6.2K 30 frames per second 10-bit video. But they did do one questionable thing, which I mentioned in my video, and that's that they added a film simulation dial on top, which I kind of feel like is a waste of space. They could have put a mode dial or an ISO dial, but I guess they just really wanted to double down on what makes them unique, and that's the film simulations. Now, I didn't really cover a lot of phones this year. As I said, I covered the S24 Ultra, but I also covered the iPhone 16 Pro when it came out in September. And although it's an awesome phone, nothing wrong with it, I feel like it was the smallest improvement over the previous iPhone 15 Pro. Yeah, it got the 48 megapixel ultra wide camera, but I feel like that number sounds more impressive than the images that come from it. I feel like they use the same lens, and it can't resolve 48 megapixels, so it looks like a 12 megapixel image. And then they came out with the camera control button, which is kind of gimmicky, and if you own an iPhone 16 Pro, I'm sure you don't even use that anymore. But they did add 4K 120 frames per second, and you can shoot that in Apple Log 10-bit, which is a big deal. And it's awesome that Apple gives you the option, because out of any phone I've tried between the iPhone 15 Pro and the 16 Pro, they're the best phones you can get for shooting video in any smartphone. Sony had a relatively quiet year. I mentioned they released a couple of those compact primes, but they also released a couple G Master lenses. The first being the 85mm f1.4 Mark II, which was definitely needed. It needed to be updated over the original. The new lens is smaller and lighter. It's 642 grams, about 20% lighter. It's definitely sharper. Has really nice fall off. It now has an 11 blade aperture with 2 XD linear motors. And with that, I'd say the autofocus motors are super fast, and that's probably the next biggest upgrade over the original, because the older one was quite a bit slower compared to this lens. Basically, any G Master lens coming out since the A9 Mark III is going to be designed to be able to focus at crazy fast speeds of up to 120 frames per second, because that's what that camera shoots at. And so this is one of them. Then a few months later, Sony dropped the 28-70 f2 G Master. And this is a completely new lens. I love this lens. Canon's had it for a while now with the RF system. And so Sony listened to the users and they made their own version of it. It's quite a bit smaller. It's quite a bit lighter than the Canon version. And that's good because Sony's cameras are also smaller, and so it bounces really nice on it. And if you watch my video, you're going to see the size of it is somewhat similar to the original 24-70 G Master 2.8, which is awesome. Having a lens that can basically stay at f2 through the entire zoom range is like having a bunch of primes, especially when this lens is as nice and sharp as this one is. It's rocking 4 XD linear motors, and as I mentioned, it can focus crazy fast, especially if you're going to pair it with Sony's newer camera bodies like the A9 Mark III or the A1 Mark II. But it is a very expensive lens. It's $3,000 US or $4,000 here in Canada. But for the people that have always wanted a lens like this, it's really nice that Sony made it for you, even if they don't sell a lot of them. Now, coming up to the end of the year, Sony's biggest release this year was last month, and I was able to be in New York for the release of the A1 Mark II. Now, the A1 Mark II is Sony's flagship camera. It's basically the best of what they have. They threw everything into it, everything they offer. Now, this is a little bit of a polarizing camera because it is still using the same full frame stacked 50 megapixel sensor from the original A1, which I feel like the people that are spewing negativity are, probably were never going to buy it and can't afford it anyway. But I kind of get it. I think that a lot of people were expecting to see another global shutter in this camera, because if it is the flagship, that would be the fastest sensor you could put in it. But the A1 sensor is still amazing, and this camera is amazing, even with that older sensor, because that sensor is still great. But with the new Bionz X dual processors, it's squeezing a little bit more dynamic range and a little bit more low light performance out of it. It now has a new body, so it's got the body of the A9 Mark III, and with that, it has that awesome tilt, flip, rotating touchscreen that we've been seeing on a few of Sony's newer cameras, and hopefully that screen makes its way down to some other cameras coming up this year. It's got 30 frames per second burst rates, it's got crazy autofocus tracking, improved AI subject detection, full frame 4K 120p 10-bit 422, basically no crop, 10-bit 8K 30 frames per second. And it has one of the best IBIS I've ever used in any Sony camera at 8.5 stops. And I feel like the A1 Mark II might be Sony's first camera without any real compromises. It basically does everything, and I'm gonna have a review on it in the coming months because I actually bought one. You might think I'm crazy, but maybe I am crazy, I don't know. But it's the first camera I looked at and I was like, this has every single thing that I want in a hybrid camera. The video side of things and the photo side of things with pretty much no compromises. So I sold off a ton of cameras, a ton of gear to afford it, because this camera is $6,500 US, which is not cheap, but I was able to make it happen and I placed my order. So I'm getting that sometime at the end of this month or early January. So stay tuned to that and hopefully I don't regret buying it. All right, if you made it this far, I really appreciate you guys. I just want to say thanks for hanging out with me and watching these videos all these years. Going into 2025, it's going to be my 9th year on YouTube, which is crazy. Maybe we'll hit 300,000 subscribers. We're getting pretty close. But yeah, thanks for hanging out with me. I know some of you guys are day ones. I see you in the comments all the time. Thanks for being there. But let's get into some of the predictions for 2025, because I think there are a few obvious things that will be coming out. So the first and most obvious thing would be the Sony A7 IV. Now, the Sony A7 IV was released in 2021, so we're at 4 years now, which is insane. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago when it came out, but I think for the A7 V, they got to update that sensor. The A7 IV sensor is awesome, but it does have pretty bad rolling shutter compared to its competitors like the Nikon Z6 III. So it is showing its age now, especially that it doesn't have any of the AI subject detection stuff. Now, I still don't think Sony's going to be doing any internal RAW video like the Nikon Z6 III, but who knows? Anything's possible. They could surprise us, but definitely has to do full frame 4K 60p and 120p. The biggest drawback on the A7 IV is that cropped 4K 60p. They also got to up the burst rate and the buffer to at least 20 frames per second to get more competitive, because the A7 IV is not a speed demon. It is a capable camera when it comes to most things, but not for speed. And as for the screen, hopefully they put that rotating flip screen on it and also update the ergonomics. Maybe they put the same body, the A9 Mark III and the A1 Mark II, because this will be the next generation bodies that they're coming out with. I'm also thinking we may see an A7S IV, because we're going into 5 years now with the A7S III when it came out. They set the bar so high with that camera, it hasn't really needed to be updated. but it's definitely showing its age when it comes to autofocus and stuff. And I think that most of these cameras are coming out with 6K sensors. I'm assuming the A7S IV would also be a 6K sensor. The A7S line has always been low megapixel, large photo sites for amazing low light performance. And what you really need is around 19 to 20 megapixels to shoot 6K video. And so that would kind of make it the sweet spot for low light performance, which would also make it awesome for shooting photos, because 20 megapixels is fine for photos as well. A lot of people have kind of speculated that Sony may just drop the S line altogether for the FX line. And maybe that'll happen, maybe it won't, but it would be awesome to see a 6K open gate sensor up to 60p, 10-bit 422, or 12-bit internal RAW if they want to do that. I have a feeling they would save the RAW for the FX3 Mark II, which, while I'm on it, could also be updated next year as well. Now, I've seen a lot of requests for Sony to make a full frame 6K open gate sensor, as well as having internal electronic ND, which would be amazing if they could fit that into the FX3 Mark II, because that thing would be a home run. The FX3 is still so popular. You see them all over the place. Everyone loves that camera. But if they could add internal ND filters to it, that would be amazing. And then speaking of cinema cameras, since Nikon bought Red, I'm wondering if Nikon would also release a competitor to the FX3, like a small, compact cinema camera, but give you the ability to shoot 16-bit red RAW, so the R3D files. That'd be amazing and huge for Nikon, because that would definitely stir things up, since they are the new owners of that patent of internal RAW recording. Outside of that, I'm not really sure what else Nikon could release. They aren't really due to release anything. The Z8 is only a couple years old and doesn't need updated. It's still such an amazing, crazy good camera. It was on a crazy sale back at Black Friday, and in some ways it's better than Sony's A1 Mark II. Now, jumping over to Canon, they released the R5 Mark II this year. I never had a chance to try it out, but the only thing Canon would really be due to update, maybe the R6 Mark II to a Mark III, but I'm not really sure if that's needed, because that came out about 2 years ago, and we'll just have to wait and see what they come out with. And for Fuji, they still haven't released an X Pro camera. The last time they released the X Pro 3 was in 2019, and I thought this year they would come out with an X Pro 4, but it never came out. And so I'm assuming they'll release an X Pro 4 next year, or maybe they'll just skip 4 and go right to 5, kind of like with the X-T50. They'll probably drop that 40 megapixel sensor in it, the new processor, and call it the X Pro 5. But I really hope they go back to that standard tilt screen. I don't think a lot of people like that flip down screen that was in the X Pro 3. It was kind of a love-hate thing, and I feel like more people hated it than loved. But it is fun to see Fuji try new things, even if people hate it. Anyway, 2025 is going to be a busy year, and I already have some things lined up I'm stoked to show you guys. As I mentioned, I'm going to be working on an A1 Mark II review, as well as my Blackmagic Pixis 6K review, which is a camera I didn't even talk about because that came out this year as well. But yeah, thanks for hanging out with me this year, and I guess I'll see you all in the next year. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give it a thumbs down twice. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, and see you guys in the next one.